So Steve has his own data modeling conference he does several times a year throughout the world. He asked me to join one. And I joined one where he wanted a challenge a few years ago to say, could he construct a data model getting requirements from an animal shelter of a new pet adoption system, and at the same speed, could I separately create the Uncork app matching the requirements? So you'll see an older photo here of the two of us. We got younger over time. But you'll see, Steve's using his data modeling tool set, and I'm using Uncork, and simultaneously we built an application based on a business user giving us real-time requirements. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Steve.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. All right. Thank you. Thank you. So models help us understand complex landscapes. We look towards a map to understand a geographic landscape. We use blueprints to understand architectural landscapes. And similarly, we use data models to understand information landscapes. So what do all of these models have in common? And they have three important traits. One is that there's only a few symbols. If you know that lines represent streets on a map, for example, you could read any map. If you know that lines represent business rules on a data model, you could read those business rules, include them in your application, and now you have higher quality data in your business. If you know that the boxes on a blueprint represent rooms in your dream home, you could discuss with your architect what the dimensions of the room are. And there is no room for misinterpretation. If you're designing a game room in your dream home and you want it to be 10 feet by 20 feet, we can't look at it and go, you know what, I kind of see it's really 10 feet by 22 feet. There's really only one way to read any of these models. And actually that gives models, including the data model, their power. The power really is in precision. Precision means that there's only one way to read anything on the model. And so, for example, if we were looking at the sentence, cases contain tasks, what does that mean? I mean, you might think you know what that sentence means, and I might think I know what it means, but are we really speaking the same language? And in order to make a sentence like cases contain tasks precise, requires asking a whole bunch of questions. Well, what is a case anyway? And what is a task? And can a case contain more than one task? Can a task belong to more than one case? Can you even have a case without a task? Can you even have a task without a case? And there's a whole bunch of other questions we ask in data modeling. And after going through this painful journey of asking the questions and getting the answers, we create our data model, this very precise tool. And there's only one way to read a data model, which gives it incredible power. It's an interesting analogy when we saw that chasm earlier between business and IT. And I've been data modeling for over 30 years, and I've also been a developer during that time as well. And I see the same chasm, but the analogy I've always used in my classes and consulting is that game of telephone, which is very similar, where, when you're kids and you whisper something in somebody's ear. So I'll whisper something in your ear, and by the time it works its way around the room, that last person says out loud what they heard, and it sounds nothing like what I whispered in your ear. And everybody laughs, and that's really how traditional application development works, where I'm going to whisper a requirement in your ear, and by the time it goes through the business owners and the business sponsors and the business analysts and the data analysts and the data modelers and the data architects and all the technologists, the developers and the testers and the deploy people and the trainers and managers of all these different departments, by the time it makes its way through the room, that last person says what they heard, and it kind of sounds nothing like that requirement I whispered in your ear. And I love that analogy of the chasm as well. But in order to make that work, in order to whisper a requirement and have it actually be implemented that way, requires precision. And so in data modeling, there's actually different levels of modeling that we do. And I've actually been teaching data modeling since 1992, and we recently released our 10th edition of our class. And in here, we kind of rethought how we view modeling in terms of precision. And it comes down to align, refine, and design. And traditionally, the modelers might use terms like conceptual, logical, physical, but it's so much broader and more important than that. So I like align, refine, design. It rhymes. And I think you could act it out. If you want to do like the YMCA, you have the align and the refine and the design. We can all practice this on the, but remember, align, refine, design. And actually align it's actually what Luke said from Goldman about the necessity within Goldman to develop a shared language. And that's really what the align stage is all about. In fact, align is all about coming up with a common business vocabulary. So you ever work on an initiative and you spend a lot of time thinking, well, what's a customer? What's a case? What's a task? What's an employee? And that whole alignment phase is about developing that common vocabulary, that shared language. And then refine is about once you have that language, so you're whispering the requirements around the room, and now that the business side kind of knows, okay, this is our language, and they're talking to the data people, the refinement stage is all about understanding what the specific requirements are for an application. So now that you know what a case is and what a task is, what do you want to do? I mean, what properties do you need about the case? What properties do you need about the task? How do they really connect to each other? And that's where the requirements come in. Traditionally a logical data model, but it sounds so boring to say logical data model. It's really about refining, really knowing what your requirements are. And then as you work your way further, you get to design, which is really making it real, taking those requirements and making them work for your technology, whether it's MongoDB or Oracle, whatever that technology would be. And the refinement piece is really, that's really where a lot of the gold lies. When I teach data modeling, I use a Lord of the Rings analogy. I don't know how many of you saw that Lord of the Rings trilogy, but the logical is really the one ring that controls them all. It really is all powerful in a lot of organizations, because what it's showing is what your requirements are without complicating the world with technology. And actually, this is really how you get somebody whispering a requirement in your ear to actually getting it done, if you follow precision with align, refine, and design. And it's actually so cool, that a picture Gary showed earlier about us building the application, because that really is the data dream, really. And it's something that, I don't know how many of you are data modelers or done data modeling. How many in the? I know no one ever goes like that, though, but it's the coolest field, really. And the reason people do data modeling for their whole career is because it's a precise language. And one of the big challenges a lot of data modelers have, so a lot of organizations have, and it can even make it more general to when Gary had data management on his slide, is that there is another gap that exists. So one of the chasms is business and IT, but another gap that exists is kind of doing it right and doing it really fast. And sometimes there's a gap there too, where a lot of the data professionals are very much focused on, let's plan this out, we're thinking way ahead, we want to get it right. And a lot of times development teams are driven by other priorities, and they don't always work together well. And I see that a lot in my consulting assignments as well. So to make it work, really, modeling must drive. And this is actually a picture that Gary brought up earlier, where that's Gary and me when we, well, not up here, but you see on the slide, Gary and me when we were much younger. I had a lot more hair then, but I'm actually on the right. It illustrates the silo concept, where we do not want to build silos. And if you let data modeling drive, you tend to think more big picture, and you tend to do it right. So the idea of going from our precise language and being able to not lose anything between the cracks by using Uncork to automate a lot of that, so the modeling really drives, it's a really powerful idea. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm going to pick up the story where Steve left off and talk to you a little bit about what's happening to data in the wild in our enterprises, and ask the question, do you want to build your software in a data-driven first way, driven by some of the ideas that Steve talked about, right? Driven by precise models so that you don't suffer from the consequences of this telephone call phenomenon where data gets corrupted and misinterpreted. So what's happening to data in our enterprises today? This data represents the enterprise. It represents the state of what our enterprises are doing. It represents all the value that exists in the enterprise. Well, that data is spread across tens of thousands, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of databases. The data is flowing between those databases, and as that data is flowing, it is being skewed, it is being corrupted, information is being lost. And you may think, how is that possible? And I'll just give you some simple example. A simple example. Let's take the idea of a trade between two counterparties where I have to represent the direction of the trade. Whether it's a buy between a primary counterparty and a secondary counterparty, or a sell. So how you tag that trade, whether you tag it as a buy or a sell, depends on the order in which you represent the counterparties. Right? That direction is with respect to the counterparties. And so if in one system you interpret that direction in one way, and in another system you interpret it in the opposite direction, and yet the data flowing between the two is the same, you're going to misinterpret the data. And you may think, well, that's silly, that's not possible. It's happened. Another example would be, how is information being lost? Let's take that very same example. Say in one system I represent the direction of the trade as buy, sell, short sell, buy to cover. And in the next system, I don't have that full enumeration. I can only represent a buy or a sell. All of a sudden, I've lost information. And you may say, well, that doesn't really happen, does it? Yes, it does. Firms have paid regulatory fines for not correctly identifying their short sells and not being able to monitor the activity of their traders. And so many of us work in large, complex enterprises where our data is fractured, it's siloed across islands. It's hard to get at. That data is all over the place. To drive innovation and automation, we need access to that data. And because we know the data is in a very parlous state, and so many critical processes depend on it, we have to reconcile that data. And we have thousands of professionals whose job is to figure out how broken our data is and fix it. And so, we really want to move to a world where we are treating our data better than we are today, and that we are treating it as a first-class citizen. We're treating it as a product. We model it in the ways that Steve just described very precisely, so we have a shared understanding and semantic of what that data means. We catalog it, we secure it, we make it accessible, and we power our innovation and our product development off the back of it. And the ultimate expression of that is to start to decouple data from the applications that we build and deliver data as a platform in its own rights, so that the functions that apply to the data are themselves stateless functions where the data remains at rest and we don't move it around, we don't duplicate it. And so I think, just as we have serverless leading to codeless, I think, the application of those technologies to data first will help us solve these enterprise data challenges. Thank you.